If you've ever upset or fought with one of your parents, you may have heard them say, "Oh, you're just like your father," or "You're just like your mother." This may have confused you and may have even made you wonder, "Well, of course I am. He or she makes up half of my genetic material." Genetics and behavior. This chapter is going to focus on the extent or if any genetic inheritance influences our behavior as human beings. And a very common question that is asked in relation to this topic is, to what extent does genetic inheritance influence behavior? This first video is going to focus on breaking down genetics and genes so that you are able to develop an understanding of different terminologies and what they are, and able to understand research that we will look at later on in this unit or chapter. As we know, our body contains billions of cells. We learned about the nucleus, the neuron, which also contains a nucleus. And just like the neuron, several other cells in the body, basically all of them, contain a nucleus. And each of the cell in our body that contains a nucleus has a set of chromosomes. We have 23 sets of chromosomes in total, which are presented in pairs except for the sex chromosome. Half of these chromosomes are passed on from our father and the other half from our mother. So this chromosome, or our chromosomes, are basically that which contain our DNA. DNA are molecules which store information and code through 4 different chemical bases. All of these over here, they make up chemical bases. And the combinations of these bases, basically 3 billion bases, is what make up the characteristics that we possess. Genes are a unit of heredity, a region in the DNA, right? A region in the DNA that encodes a specific trait. There are about 20,000 genes estimated for human beings. Alleles are how the gene is spelt. Alleles are different forms of the gene. They are either dominant or recessive. A dominant allele is one that manifests in the offspring when combined with a recessive allele. A good example of alleles and the combination and how that results in a specific characteristic is that of blood type. So you all must know your blood type: A positive, B positive, or B negative, or AB, or O. So these are the different blood types that we know of. The blood type O is recessive in all human beings, right? It's a recessive allele. That means that when it's combined with A or B, it is A or B that is manifested. So let's say my father is an O blood type and my mother is an A. That would mean that the O, which is recessive, is not the allele that becomes manifested in me. Rather, it would be A that is manifested. So my blood type now would be A. Because A and B are both dominant, when combining, let's say, the father with an A allele and a mother with a B allele, there is a codominance. A codominance basically means that both of the alleles are manifested in the offspring. Now, that means that the child would have a blood type of AB. I hope that makes sense in understanding that some alleles are recessive, some are dominant, and some are able to merge together and be codominant. This is more biological, but one example that I can refer to in terms of alleles and psychology is that of the 5-HTT gene. So the 5-HTT gene is the serotonin transporter gene. We previously studied that serotonin is a neurotransmitter and is one that influences mood, appetite, and has also been associated with prosocial behavior and even hallucinations. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter which is closely associated with the development of depression in individuals. Antidepressants that are often prescribed to people who are depressed and have a depressive disorder primarily function to regulate the level of serotonin available in the nervous system. As mentioned earlier, there has been a gene that is identified that is responsible for the inheritance of depression, which is associated to the combinations of 5-HTT alleles. There are two types of 5-HTT alleles, short and long, and both these alleles are dominant. So if, for example, we look at this first one, if the mother has a short allele and the father has a short allele, the child will have two short alleles of 5-HTT. And the same applies to if both the parents have long alleles, the child will have two long alleles of 5-HTT. If the mom has a 5-HTT short allele and the father has a 5-HTT long allele, the child will have a short and long 5-HTT. So if we further explore into depression and the research that has been conducted by Caspi et al. In 2003, it was found that the individuals who had the short 5-HT allele, 5-HTT allele, were the ones who had the highest reaction of depression when experiencing stressful events. And you will look into this research further on in this chapter. So all of this information might be a little overwhelming for you. And the best way to look at it, all these different parts of the gene and genetic inheritance, is through the sentence metaphor. So the DNA is the sentence, right? The big, long sentence. Chromosomes are the different lines. A sentence can have several lines, right? The bases are the letters that make up the gene, which is the word, right? And alleles are how the letters are used to spell the gene out. So, if we had to really put that down as a whole, the human DNA is a sentence that consists of 23 lines as chromosomes, 20,000 words, which are the genes, and 3 billion letters, which are the bases. Each word is spelled twice, once by the mother and once by the father. And there are many differences in the spelling. The combination of the spelling is what determines the trait or the function in the offspring. I hope this helps you kind of get an idea of the different parts of the gene and how they're influencing one another and how they manifest together. We are going to look at one final piece of terminology that is relevant for you to understand genetics, which is genotype and phenotypes. Genotype is a set of genes in our DNA responsible for a trait. So XX and XY is the genotype, right? And this helps us understand the sex of the child, right? Whether it's male or female. And phenotype is the actual manifestation of a genetically predisposed trait. So if it's XX, this means that the person is a female. If it's XY, which is the genotype, the phenotype is male, right? And another example could be MAOA, which is the gene, and it basically means there is an XXY or XYY, and that is the genotype, but the characteristic that is related to it, the phenotype, is of aggression, right? And it's not necessary that this manifests. It just basically means that there is a predisposed trait, which I will explain a little further.